It's funny when Wendy invited me to come speak, and I thought TEDxSandHillRoad, wow. That name, for anyone who's gone on the pitch route, conjures up such hope, anxiety. It's one of those roads that kind of fits in with Rodeo Drive. You know what it is immediately, or Madison Avenue. It's kind of boulevard of broken dreams for a lot of entrepreneurs who've made the route. And a source of lots of hope and a lot of technology that's really changed the world too. So I'm very happy to be here on Sand Hill Road and talking about a lot of people in this country who have no idea what Sand Hill Road is, but are affected by it. So as Leeson said, my life changed very much when I was working as tornado recovery coordinator in Jackson, Tennessee. What she didn't mention is that I was running the mayor's campaign at the time. So the night before, I'd gone out and put up, I think, probably record numbers of yard signs. And there were parts of town the next day where the only thing standing were those yard signs. And I still had the blisters. When that occurred, I spent a lot of time over the days and weeks and months that followed speaking to people whose homes had been blown away, who didn't know what was going to happen next. And I was going back and forth from my small town to the state capitol to the national capitol and hearing about things like appropriations bills that might pass or might not pass, or grant programs that I needed to apply to. It just was such an illustration of how the macro didn't always connect with the micro. And how important the real people are on the ground. So Hart stays very close with local government, and certainly with my hometown. And I also know that a lot of people who come to Silicon Valley happen to be from places that aren't Silicon Valley. And I think that that's a very important thing too, that when we're out here experiencing robotics and seeing people actually inventing the future, that we understand how that translates to the rest of the country and the rest of the world. And so that's a little bit of what I want to talk about today, but in the context of something that's going to make you think about high school, probably. So how many of you have thought lately about the idea and the concept of a civic duty? Yeah, I'm impressed, really. So what do you think about when you think about your civic duty? What is your civic duty? What would you say?
To make a difference.
Make a difference, that's a good one. Yeah.
Vote.
Voting, yeah, that always comes up. Any other, like?
It's our responsibility to be informed.
Absolutely. So I went and did a Google search when I had the opportunity to talk about this, because I've really been obsessed with this concept of civic duty and what it means in our modern world. And there weren't that many good definitions of it. There were laundry lists. And so the laundry list is, if you get called to jury duty, you should show up. If you happen to be male, then you should sign up with selective services. Those are the ones that are not optional. And then you get into things like voting, and also it's your civic duty to obey the law and to report it if you witness someone else not obeying the law. And then being informed and participating in making your community better, get into those areas of civic duty that are certainly something that are more optional but highly suggested. But one of the things that I found when I was looking into this concept of civic duty and have been thinking a lot about is how inherent it is in our system of government. If you have a top-down government, civic duty is not quite as important as it is when you're operating in a system of government of, by, and for the people. Because that implies and requires participation and contribution from people to the community. And this really ties into Sand Hill Road. I will tell you how that happens. There was a speech given about a month ago in Silicon Valley. I don't know if any of you saw it. It caused a little bit of a ruckus. The New York Times wrote it up. There was one entrepreneur, I won't mention his name, but it was a very interesting speech, but the title of it was Silicon Valley's Ultimate Exit. And it was basically secession from the union. It was a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but he presented these options that there are two ways to deal with conditions sometimes that you don't like. There's either use your voice and change it, or just get out of Dodge. And he was suggesting that getting out of Dodge was an option. And I actually disagree. But I thought that the point was eloquently made about some of the challenges that we experience. But I also think that we live in unprecedented times with unprecedented ability to affect our world, especially here, and especially given the kind of the innovation and the possibility that surrounds us here. And this connects back to the roots of Tennessee, because when I go home, I don't feel that the rest of the country actually understands that in the same way. It is in the water out here. I used to try to explain it to my friends in DC when I first moved out here. I was like, it's like when you go into a Starbucks, you know that the barista has a business plan in his back pocket and is going to pitch the next VC who walks in. And everybody's working on something. And there's a sense of possibility here that is so incredibly optimistic. And I moved out here in 2010. So we were, at the tail end of the recession, which, as we all know, began kind of bouncing back here in ways that much more quickly than it did in the rest of the country. But that optimism is also tied in with an attitude that is so very Silicon Valley, that is something that the rest of the world, and certainly DC, can benefit from. And so when I think about the civic duty of Silicon Valley, I mean it not in the laundry list of, yes, paying taxes and voting and jury duty and all of those wonderful things, but I think there's a special civic responsibility, civic duty, to help policymakers and the rest of the country understand this spirit of possibility that's out here. And to give you you talked about social networks in the introduction. To give a very concrete example, when I first moved to Silicon Valley from DC, I realized that LinkedIn was a big thing. And it's so funny that it actually wasn't in DC at the time. And there's a reason for that, and it has nothing to do with technology. It's because, at least in that environment, especially the political environment, which tends to be very zero-sum, the attitude is, these are my contacts. Right. You need them? What do I get out of it? Maybe I'll introduce you, but you're really going to owe me one. And it's a very closed environment. That's just the way business gets done there. I do think that things are starting to change. But one of the things that I noticed in Silicon Valley is as soon as you meet someone, they say, oh, you should talk to so-and-so. And so many of the wonderful things that have happened to me while I'm out here, I came from a coffee meeting with someone. I don't even know how we met, but they introduced me to 3 people, and that led to the next person, who all of a sudden is a partner working in. You know what I'm talking about. The heads are nodding. That's just the way it works out here. There's a wonderful energy of, I'm going to open up. I'm going to, share my story. I'm going to listen to your story, even though right now I can't completely discern what's in it for me, and just see what connections are made. And connections get made all the time. It's a lovely way to live. And I think that it's something that the rest of the country, both technologically and now even in spirit, is starting to learn. So I think that's something that I am very happy is being shared, and something that I feel is very much a duty to be shared. So back to the question of Sand Hill Road, and to the point of what I think is a civic duty of Silicon Valley that I think still needs a little bit of work, and the challenge that I would give. So many of you, I'm sure, have read countless articles that talk about entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley not working on the important problems of the day. Surely you've read those articles. I had the honor of judging the TechCrunch hackathon at Disrupt this year. I hear some giggles because you might know that there were some interesting things that came up during that hackathon. I am not referring to those particular companies. There were some really interesting ones that were offered. But I went back and looked at the list of the 260 plus hacks that were presented at that hackathon, and I think fully close to 30 were shopping apps. Double digits were fitness apps, and I can't even count how many photo sharing apps there were. And a lot of that is just because it's become a bit of a cookie cutter. It's become a bit of a formula. It's become something that's very expected when you go make the rounds on Sand Hill Road. And there's a bit of a rut, I think, that the kind of build a business, get it funded, sell it to Google, round has brought Silicon Valley into. And what's interesting is that I think something's changing that actually becomes very important for women. And that is that the technology, aside from building robots and things like that, but the technology, the very basic technology that is in all of our lives now, is something that you don't have to be an engineer to understand. You may have to be a coder to figure out how to make it work, but you don't have to be the person who understands the ones and zeros in order to imagine how technology can solve your problem. We used to live in a world where you had to wait for college students at Harvard to figure out your problem and go design a solution in their dorm room, come out here, get it funded, and release it to the world. We're no longer there, and people sitting at those kitchen tables like we just saw before, people working in legacy industries that could use a bit of disruption now can imagine how technology can be applied to their life and how technology can make a difference. And those are the ones who are coming up with the technology ideas now, and that will be the businesses of the future. And frequently, a woman in a business is the person who's going to come up with that idea for a very specific reason. If you are benefiting from the status quo, you don't have a whole lot of incentive to disrupt it. If you're young and new in the industry, you probably don't always know enough about the big picture to disrupt it. But if you've been there for a while and maybe have started to understand the things that are not connecting and working, and you've kind of thought to yourself, there's a better way to do this, and not always had the opportunity to bring that up the chain, you're the perfect person to disrupt that industry. And I think that we will see coming in the next few years lots of women with lots of insight in business verticals, including government and other places, bringing their ideas to Silicon Valley and around the country because the world is changing. And what I've come to understand is that just because these companies were centered in Silicon Valley before, it doesn't necessarily mean that they will be in the future. And this relates back to my experience in Tennessee, where I'm now working with entrepreneurs there to help them understand the possibility of building these kinds of businesses in Tennessee. I heard someone speak a couple of months ago, and they said, yes, capital is mobile, but capitalists are lazy. And so the fact that the financing tends to be focused out here is still one of the reasons that the rest of the country doesn't feel the same amount of opportunity. But making those connections will be vital to helping the rest of the country feel a part of the future that's being created here. So all of that to circle back to one example that relates to my work with Popvox, and it's a very specific policy example. We take no positions on policy, but one of the things that I noticed when I first came out here, immigration reform was a very big topic that lots of people were discussing, and it seemed that especially H-1B visas were something that people in Silicon Valley advocated for very much. There was a strong support, at least in a lot of places, on that issue. But when I looked on Popvox to see what people were saying about this particular issue, there were very different opinions in the middle of the country as opposed to the edges. And the reason for that, I think, is because there's not enough understanding in the middle of the issues that are being discussed on the coast. And so I suggested to people who are working on these issues, please just get on a bus and drive through the middle of the country, go speak to the local Rotary clubs, or go talk to entrepreneurs in these areas and share your story so that they feel connected. Because right now, I can tell you in Lexington, Tennessee, and Jackson, Tennessee, Silicon Valley feels like the moon for lots of people. But the rest of the country and the world want to cheer on the progress that happens here. They want to feel that they're a part of it, and they want to feel like when Elon Musk launches a rocket successfully earlier in the week, that we all win in the same way that everyone watched the launches of rockets in times past when they were led by NASA. So I come to share the experience of coming to Silicon Valley and being so in awe and appreciative of learning the way that this wonderful, magical place where the future is created works, and to also say that it will work even better and have even greater impact the more the connections are made with the rest of the world and the rest of the country. There's great desire for those connections, an amazing opportunity with the ideas and the innovation that exist with real people out in the rest of the country. And I think that it is the civic duty of the people who live and work here in technology to take those ideas and share them and to connect with the rest of the country and the rest of the world. So that's my challenge to you, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about it. Thank you.